Hi, in this short video we're going to provide an introduction to COSHH, Control of Substances Hazardous to Health. My name's Chris from FQM and we'd appreciate it if you subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn. And don't forget, we've got lots of free resources available on our website. So, control of substances hazardous to health. What do we mean by that? So, the basic principle of these regulations is to safeguard the health of all persons who have to work with substances that may have a hazardous condition to their health. Remember, a substance can be a liquid, a solid, a gas, and include microorganisms and dust. These regulations apply to all workplaces. So we're referring to the COSHH regulations. So what are the main elements about COSHH? So the main elements described in the regulations is to ensure that you assess the risk to health arising from the work and what precautions that you need to put in place. Introduce the appropriate measures to prevent or control the risk, and it's always recommended to use the hierarchy of controls where possible. Ensure by good supervision that the control measures are used effectively, and of course that appropriate equipment that is being used with the substances is maintained and procedures are followed. You want to monitor the exposure of your workers, and where appropriate you may have to carry out certain surveillance on their health, and this may include the use of external health advisors. You have to inform and instruct and train employees about those risks. So it's not just a case of doing the COSHH assessment and keeping it in a folder, but it must involve the people that are undertaking the work. We must be aware of any concerns that they have and put in place any appropriate measures of controls that are required for these precautions. And of course, remember, things change, people change, equipment changes. So we have to review this on a regular basis, and where appropriate, we have to improve it. So when we refer to a COSHH assessment, it's the exposure to a substance that we're trying to avoid. There may be alternative work methods that can be done to reduce the exposure, or it may be that we can replace the substance with something else that is less harmful. Often companies use the same substances because it's the ones they have always used, but maybe they can source alternatives by contacting the supplier of this material. Likewise, the engineering practices and equipment that's used may be the same as always has been, but possibly by using the hierarchy of controls, we can look to see if there are any engineering practices or equipment changes, evolution in technology that can reduce the harm in how these substances are handled and used. Remember, substances that are supplied will have a warning label on them, and they will outline what those cautions and precautions need to be. So what about how it applies to you? So you must, as an individual, as an employee, you must adhere to the COSHH assessment, not cut corners. Always follow the correct controls that are listed within the COSHH assessment, including the use of PPE and ensuring that the PPE is appropriate and in good condition. You must ensure you're aware of the locations of any washing or first aid facilities, and of course be aware of what the emergency protocols may have to be if there is emergency that occurs. And as part of COSHH, we must remember it's not just in the use of these hazardous substances, but it's also in the practices we follow for storing them and transporting them correctly. If you are unsure, you should seek help. Never guess what you have to do. Furthermore, if required, stop the job. Take 5 to assess what is going on around you. So let's think a little bit about how a COSHH assessment is generated. Well, firstly, what we have to do is we have to understand the safety data principles associated to the substance. In order to understand what those are, we have to obtain a copy of a safety data sheet provided by the provider, the supplier of that substance. Within this safety data sheet, it describes the hazards that the substance presents and gives information on handling, storage, emergency measures and first aid measures. But remember, by law, the supplier of these substances must provide this safety data sheet to us, and we must ensure that when we change our substances, we always get a copy of the updated or new revision of a safety data sheet. One of the most important failures that organisations make is they believe that the safety data sheet is their risk assessment. That's not correct. The safety data sheet is provided to give you information and educate you in order that you can take the appropriate assessment using the COSHH methodology, using a COSHH assessment template, so that it's set up and the controls are in place appropriate to your organisation. Not another business, not a copy of a COSHH assessment from somewhere else, but something that's appropriate to exactly your business and the people and controls that you put in place within your organisation. What I want to do now is I want to show you some examples of a safety data sheet and a COSHH assessment template and how it would be completed. So here we have an example of a safety data sheet that's provided by a company that supplies us with liquefied propane gas. So we can see here that there are different sections. There's an area identification of the substance itself. We then go down and we see an area that identifies the hazards associated to that substance. And further down we see the signal words which are associated also to the hazard statements and precautionary statements associated to this substance only. We also see some information associated to response and also to storage. This is the area where we get information on other hazards that may be appropriate but not covered under the statements above. And furthermore, as we scroll down, we get the information on first aid measures, description of the first aid measures, and any important emergency protocols about firefighting, etc., etc. So based on this safety data sheet that has been provided by the supplier, we can see what advice they provide specifically associated to this substance. What we have to do is we have to take this advice and we have to assess it in our workplace. And this is where we use a COSHH assessment process. This can be done by means of a paper or electronic template. The example I'm going to show you here is an example of just a basic Excel template that you can get free from our website. So here we have a control of substances hazardous to health assessment form. We can see here that we have a reference number associated to it. We've identified the company, the product, the supplier, plus we've described the process and how we will use the substance within our workplace. We have also identified here some information associated to the signal word that came from the safety data sheet and information associated to the working exposure limits. Likewise, we have also looked at the safety data sheet and identified certain information that's appropriate to us in whether we need to understand handling and storage, controls and personal protection, etc., etc. We've also identified the hazard type as a gas and liquid. And here we've got the routes and effects of the exposure. So we've identified those based on the safety data sheet and the practices that we follow in our workplace, that it's associated to inhalation, skin contact and eye contact. We've captured the hazard symbols taken from the safety data sheet and described them, and we've also identified the hazard and precautionary statements from the safety data sheet and the first aid measures to be taken. We understand here that the persons exposed are our operatives and that we have monitoring activity on a daily basis through our task cards and permit control system. We also note that health surveillance may be required, not at this current time, but we will continue to monitor that and reference the standard appropriate to that. We see that we have control measures specifically for our organisation in the use of this substance. So we've identified the control measures and a description of what those are from our permits, from our engineering controls, our toolbox talks, our PPE that's required, the first aid and emergency procedures where appropriate. We've identified with our operatives that the work practices using these substances and the controls we have in place are at an acceptable level for the work to commence. And we must recognise that we have to review this information on a regular basis and give our operatives the opportunity to feed back to us. So we can see here that we have verified the adequacy of the controls, and we do this on a regular basis through our permit, toolbox talk, our supervision and our regular audits that we undertake. And we've identified the people who will undertake those control measures to ensure they're working. We've identified who the assessor is, signed it off, and of course we've finished off by saying that, it's based on the information provided by the supplier, the observations and the practices that we undertake. And we are saying that the safety data sheet should accompany this assessment because this assessment has to be available to the operatives that are undertaking this work. We also say, do not attempt to use the substance if unsure. Take 5 for safety. Step back and think, do I need to get more help? Do I need training? Do I need more advice? So it's important to recognise that as part of COSHH to protect yourself and others around you. So we want to finish off just by a couple of things. Firstly, I want to ensure you're aware that this was an introduction to COSHH. This was not a COSHH Assessors training course. COSHH Assessors training course goes into far greater detail, and it's a competence that's required for people to undertake COSHH assessments in a workplace. So let me just give you a few takeaways to finish off with. Collect the information on the substance you use and the work practices that you undertake. Evaluate the health risks to the individuals using it and those around them. Select appropriate control measures to reduce or eliminate those risks. Record your findings and implement your control measures, and ensure that you monitor the performance of people using those control measures, the changes of substances, and ensure that you review your assessment fairly regularly to ensure that it's up to date. My name's Chris from FQM. I'd like to remind you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on LinkedIn. Thanks very much.